Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ilyas from the Department of Education, Hazara University, Mansehra. Today we are going to discuss a very interesting qualitative research topic, and that is historical research. What is historical research? Why is it needed that we conduct historical research? And how is actually historical research conducted? Or what are some of the nitty-gritties of historical research? So this brief presentation is actually response to these three questions briefly. And so let us begin with some interesting quotes related to history and learning. The first one is by George Hegel, this quote has been attributed to him, and who says that we learn from history, that we do not learn from history. This is quite paradoxical, and this has actually generated a lot of debate related to the paradoxical connotations of this particular quote, which actually connotes that we learn from history on the one hand, but at the same time that we learn that we do not learn from history. And that actually means that even if people study history, there is this tendency of human beings to repeat history and to repeat the same actions despite their knowledge of that their particular actions have led to particular consequences in the past. Then there is this other one by George Santayana, who argues that those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And that actually means that learning from history is quite important. Otherwise, those who do not learn from their past mistakes will have to repeat those mistakes. And then this last one by Margaret Macmillan is very important, and that actually says that we can learn from history, but we can also deceive ourselves when we selectively take evidence from the past to justify what we have already made up our minds to do. And this is a more comprehensive and perhaps more rational and more scientific way of looking at the study of history and the role of history in our education and in our learning and in the shaping of our future behavior. And here it seems the author actually wants to tell us that we have to study history objectively, and that we have to learn from history rationally and objectively, and that selective study or selection from study on the basis of our own prejudices is something that might be harmful. And so this is just to get you into the interesting ideas and the arguments and counter arguments related to the learning of history and related to the consequences of learning or from history or otherwise. Now we move into the more formal definition of this particular type of research, which is historical research. So what it is? This definition that I have actually compiled from a number of different definitions is perhaps a useful beginning, and it is that a form of qualitative research that is aimed at identifying and systematically exploring and analyzing happenings, events, objects, issues, problems, situations in their historical contexts in order to understand their impact on or relevance in the present times. So it's quite a comprehensive definition, and this actually means that historical research as a qualitative research has a number of aims, and these aims including the identification of issues of historical importance and then systematically exploring those issues or events or objects or problems and situations, and studying these, analyzing these in their historical context in order to understand and in order to get implications for our present and for our future. Here are some simple examples. There are numerous examples that could be put forward, but there are some simple examples in order to simplify the concept. And so these examples include, for example, this could be a study of historical nature or a historical research, an analysis of the causes and consequences of the First World War. Such study could be conducted by students of history or political science or other similar subjects. Similarly, an analysis of historical evolution of education policy making in a country. This is some study that an educational historian could conduct, and similarly a critical historical review of a particular educational philosophy. This is a study that someone who is interested in the history of educational philosophy, such as an educational researcher or a professor of education or a student of philosophy of education, could explore in its historical context. So these are three simple examples of historical research. Now, the why of historical research, which actually means why do we need to conduct historical research? Well, there are a number of reasons for conducting historical research, and these include our need to understand the past, which means the past events, issues, and problems objectively. We have some understanding, some knowledge of the past events or issues or problems, but historical research is a more objective and a more systematic way of understanding and exploring past events, issues, and problems. Then we also do these kind of studies in order to understand the present in the light of the past. So we do not study the past just for the sake of it, but we might also need to understand the present in the light of the past. This is also an important reason because the past, understanding the past often helps us in understanding the present. Then to see the possible implications of the past for the present. So what lessons can we get from the past in order to shape our present, in order to locate what we need to do in the present? And then to have insights for future in the light of our objective and critical understanding of the past. This is also an important reason because many humans are actually future oriented, and they are not just interested in their present, they are interested in the past, but they are also interested in how things will take place in the future. And so studying the past will also help in understanding objectively and critically what is going to happen in the future on the basis of our understanding of the past, on the basis of similarities and differences of these two different periods of our intellectual life. Then how? Like, what are the ways, what is the process that is involved in historical research? So, like research in general, in historical research, there is identification of an issue or a question or a topic of historical significance. And this will vary according to the researchers, according to the needs and wants of the researchers who want to conduct a particular study. Issues, questions, topics that have historical significance will depend on the situation and on the interests and the needs of the ones who are conducting this particular research. So identification of issues, questions, and topics of historical significance is important. And this will generally come out as a result of the initial reading and thinking of the historical researcher. The second step, you could also say, will be the formulation of research questions or hypotheses on the basis of that initial reading and initial thinking and initial analysis. There will be questions, research questions and hypotheses, and then formulation of a research strategy or design. The next thing that will come will be to formulate the how of that particular research, or the different steps involved in going about and conducting the study in a practical sense. And that actually will mean the chronological order of the various sources that the researcher would be interested in, and similarly, what are the different themes that the researcher is interested in exploring related to the questions and hypotheses. These will also help in shaping and designing the research strategy. Then the next thing in the how question will be the systematic location and collection, analysis and interpretation of data. Historical data, locating historical data is often a very difficult task, and it's a time-consuming task, and a lot of energy and resources and time is needed for locating, especially locating these data systematically, then for collecting that data, and then for ordering and analyzing that data, and then the process of interpretation of the data. So these are the things that needs to be taken care of, that needs to be considered while one is going for conducting historical research. And then, of course, on the basis of all of these steps, the historical researcher will come up with his or her conclusions and implications. And this will ultimately lead to a report writing, which is actually a report that actually presents the whole research process, including the how and why of the research questions and objectives, the methodology, and then the analysis, and also the conclusions, implications, and recommendation, etc. of the research process. These will be part of the research report. There are certain things and that is actually related to the sources that are needed in historical research. So what type of sources are generally used in conducting historical research? So two main types of sources have been identified by academics, and these include the primary and secondary sources. Again, these primary and secondary sources have been variously defined, but here some of the common meanings that have been derived from these sources, so I have just included those. And so the primary sources have been identified with things, objects, people who directly belong to the phenomena under study. Or in some cases, some academics have also associated documents which includes written records, letters, logbooks, policy documents, registers, newspapers, catalogs, and a number of other such documents have been associated with primary sources used in historical researches. Then secondary sources have also been identified by some of those some of the writers and academics, and these include sources reported by people who are not involved in the events directly but relied on other sources. And so these have been identified as secondary sources, and these include history books, and the books, the authors of these books generally rely on other sources. Maybe they rely on primary sources or other secondary sources. And similarly, quoted material, which is actually not the author is not saying him or herself, but is referring to and is actually quoting other sources. So these have been identified as secondary sources, and encyclopedias. And there are others as well. There are numerous other sources that have been identified as secondary sources. Then we move to the last part of this presentation, and that is historical research. There are certain precautions that one certain precautionary measures that one needs to take in order to do good quality historical research. And the first one is related to the evidence that the historian or the historical researcher presents in support of the arguments or in support of the evidence, in support of the claims that he or she is making. So these have been categorized into two: external evidence, which is actually making sure that the data sources, that is the documents, objects being analyzed, is genuine, and the who, what, and why of the document. This actually means who has authored the document and what has he or she said and why. Why actually means that it is also important for the historical researcher to actually to dig out and to critically analyze the why of the conclusions of the primary authors, or the ones who have actually authored or created those documents. And then the internal evidence, which actually means that internal evidence actually relates to the authenticity or accurateness or truthfulness of the contents of the document and of the author. So here you in the first one, in the external evidence, you are basically looking for the authenticity of the material, of the document, of the object. And in the second one, the internal evidence, you are looking for the authenticity of the material itself that is reported in or included in a particular document that is under study. So both of these are important for the authenticity and genuineness of the historical research process and the historical research product. And also important are the objectivity of the historical researcher, the impartiality of the historical researcher, the carefulness is also very important, and expertise of the historical researcher are also very important. And these also actually come under the fold of the ethical considerations in historical research. So the researcher has to be objective, he or she needs to be impartial, and they also need to be careful in order to see the pros and cons of particular evidence related to particular claims or conclusions. And also they need to have the expertise in the particular field in which they are conducting this historical research. So these are the things that the historical researchers need to have in their minds while they are conducting, if they wish to conduct good quality and authentic historical research. Here are some sources that you might explore for further understanding of this research and maybe other researches as well. And as usual, if you have questions and if you have comments, if you need further elaboration on certain aspects of this presentation, please share in the comment section. Take care. Bye.